Robert Ward is my name. I'm the Marketing Director here at the National College of Ireland. And on behalf of the College, you're very welcome here. Don't forget, #GoFurther with NCI. We're delighted to partner with Independent News and Media. We're also then going to hear from Paul Melia, who's the Environment Editor at INM, and he's going to talk to us about how data is being used to provide content and also to drive circulation at INM.
Everybody again, thanks for coming. I'm not going to talk about algorithms or content development or any of the technical stuff. I'm really going to talk about how we're using data in editorial to tell stories, which is really the whole point of journalism. It's not, call it content, call it whatever you like, but really it's about telling stories, about people, about places, about the issues that affect them. And that's something that the Irish Independent and INM have been increasingly doing in the last number of years as we are using these tools that Mick and his team are developing, and we're using the data that's becoming increasingly more available to actually get behind the stories and to get into the why and the wherefores of why things happen and not just reporting a straight fact. In terms of my own role, I'm the Environment Editor in the Irish Independent. I cover, I guess, the really dull but worthy stuff that newspapers have to cover. I cover pipes, I cover energy, I cover water, I cover climate change. I cover housing, and I cover a number of other areas as well where there is more and more data becoming available in these areas that we can use to shape our editorial content. It's obviously not just the Independent that's doing this. I mean, we've media groups across the world, we've the Guardian, we've the New York Times, we've publishers across Ireland as well who are also looking at this. It's something that we're all moving towards to. And in many ways it's a very exciting area because it's all different from very much of what's come before. But really, the concept is the same. We've always been using data. I guess the thing is, what is data and what have we been using up to date? There's very few journalists that haven't had the pleasure of, perusing a Mahon Tribune report of hundreds of pages or an annual report from the State Spending Watchdog, the Controller and Auditor General. We've all done it. What's been very different in the past is that this information has landed in paper format. We've gotten files, we've gotten reports that had to be read for any information to be gleaned from them. There was no quick and simple ways to do it. You couldn't do a word search. You couldn't look for keywords or topics in these books. You actually had to wade through them. We deal with data every single day. We process information from a wide variety of sources. There's this day-to-day stuff, things like the house price figures from the Central Statistics Office. There's water quality data from the Environmental Protection Agency. There's exchequer returns from the Department of Finance. There's tax defaulter lists from the Revenue Commissioners and so on. And of course, that's not even to mention the innumerable statistical surveys that come in from PR companies about how 1 in 4 people are going to spend more this year whitening their teeth than they did last year. It's coming in all shapes and forms. And our job is to process that and see what's going to be of use and of interest to our readers. What's different now really with this data is that it's much more accessible. We can do much more with it. There's much more of it. It's coming in different file types and different formats, some of which we can process ourselves in the newsroom, others which we need some help from the data team. But with the advent of online, really what's happened is that it's given us the opportunity to do so much more, both in print and online as well, but just to get that depth about coverages and about issues that perhaps we couldn't do before quite as easily. I'm going to talk about 3 major projects that we've done in the last year or so in the Independent, using data to tell stories, I guess, in a different way. We've used all the medium. We've used newsprint, we've used online, we've used video, we've used social media, and each has presented different opportunities and challenges. The first I'm going to talk about is Crime Nation, which we carried in November last year, which was an analysis of Central Statistics Office data of crime rates across the country in each county, and also the stories behind those statistics. We looked at the victims, we looked at the reasons for crime, we looked at spikes, we looked at falls. The second is probably the biggest data project we ever did, which was the election 2014 coverage. It was the local and European elections across the country. There was also 2 by-elections. We provided in-depth and real-time coverage of these elections for the first time. Mick tells me, in fact, it was the first example of reverse publishing, where really it was the online end of things that was producing the information and the stories, and then we were converting that into print later on. And the third project is the rent report, something we did a little bit more recently, where we looked at the cost of renting in Ireland. 1 in 7 people, about 1 in 5 households, currently rent their homes. It's a huge issue. Rents are rising. We looked at how much people were actually paying in around 400 locations around the country. This is a report from the Garda Commissioner from 1955. It's essentially the annual report, again in paper format. This told us various things that were happening in Ireland in that year. There was about 11,500 indictable offences, or cases which involved a trial by jury. There was 5 murders that year. There was 52 last year by way of comparison. It even got into lighting up offences, where people were prosecuted for not having a light on their bicycles. That clearly was how data was presented. But as this slide here shows, how that data is presented is really the key to its usefulness. I mean, this is a bar chart on indictable crime to show you trends. It doesn't really tell you anything. You can't really get into what's happening on the ground in various districts and regions across the country. But now things are different. Now the Gardaí records this information and they give it to the Central Statistics Office. And now we have access to data on 76 different offence types in 34 divisions, ranging from everything from cases of human trafficking in Laois to carjacking in Cork, litter offences in Waterford. Pretty much anything that is a crime, you can find data on where it's happening. And in fact, this is only one layer. You can actually get deeper into this data. You can get it down to station level, which we did on a separate project looking at drink driving rates. So you could actually find out if Store Street Garda Station had a higher rate of people being caught drink driving or drug driving than Ballahadreen in County Roscommon. So with this information, what we decided to do was, under the Crime Nation banner, we looked at this crime across the regions. We used print and online, we used tables, graphics, video to tell the story of how crime impacts on real people. And this kicked off in November 2014. It was a 4-part special report, again across our print titles, across the Irish Independent and online. And it mostly involved the work of our public affairs editor Shane Phelan and Sean McCorrick. So we looked again, as I said, the main causes of crime. We looked at communities, how they were coping with it, how they were fighting back, how they're using things like text alert systems to warn their neighbours of something happening. We spoke to people living in Ireland's safest and most dangerous towns and villages, and we provided an in-depth analysis of the issues involved. But we also looked at Ireland's crime black spots and saw how offences were changing in each individual area. There was about 250,000 separate offences analysed as part of this series, so it was a fairly weighty piece of work. And really what it showed us was 1 in 20 people were affected by crime, and while the overall rate fell that year by 7%, it shot up 11% in County Laois. Online, we could do an awful lot more, and interactive tools were developed by the data science team, which allowed really readers to examine and learn what was happening in their area. This slide here shows us one of the tools that we use. People could use a range of offences, drugs, assaults, theft, public order and so on, and they could see what was happening exactly in their area. Then we also had we looked at Garda strength and ratio by county. We looked at the number of Gardaí in terms of hard numbers. We also looked at the number of Gardaí per 10,000 population, and we tracked that over time. So you could see if there was more guards in your area based on your population than before. This is obviously a key concern of a lot of people living in Ireland, particularly in rural Ireland, that there isn't enough guards. We actually said, well, look, here is the raw data. In some areas there was more Gardaí than there were before, in others there was obviously less. Again, what was the value of this to our readers? Well, look, it showed how crime affected their area. It's a topic that people are interested in all the time. It ranked the county's crime rates per 10,000 population. It showed which was the most dangerous and which were the safest counties in which to live. It showed the rate of change. It highlighted the highest ranking offences. It explored regional discrepancies. For example, in Waterford, there was a higher rate of rape and sexual offences than in other counties. Homeowners were more likely to be burgled in County Louth, and violent assault was higher in Donegal. But importantly too, it told the story behind the data, and that's the key to this. Data really is meaningless unless you can illustrate it with people. For example, in Dublin, burglary rates are below the national average. This was of absolutely no comfort whatsoever to this lady here, a lady called Elle Keegan, a photographer who had thousands of euros of photographic equipment stolen from her. So really, it was the third time her home was broken into. The actual rape meant nothing. All she knew was that she had been burgled 3 times. It's telling the story really behind the data that's interesting. That's the kicker with this, and this is what makes it really exciting for journalists. That if you have people who can analyse this stuff for you and help you draw out the stories, really, I mean, the sky is the limit, not to use a cliche, but you can do so much with it and really give so much more to your readers, because every day a reader buys your paper or goes online, you have to be giving them something new. You have to be giving them something different, something interesting, something in-depth that your competitors don't have. If you don't adapt, you don't change, you don't use the tools that are available to you, you will die. you're finished, your business is over. That's what makes this so exciting, and also what a huge challenge it is. The second piece of work that we did is the election 2014 coverage. This was really an enormous task. We were in every count centre across the country, more than 50. There was dozens of reporters out in the field. There was photographers, there was videographers, there was all that. And we teed this up, we advertised in advance, and we said, look, we are going to be covering the counts, each and every count from every single count centre across the country. We'll have the tallies, so from the moment the first ballot boxes are opened, the independent will be there, and we will tell you what's happening in your area. We used independent.ie, we used Twitter, we used Facebook, we used the print product. We just stuck an ad in the paper saying this is what was happening, to try and encourage as many people to come online and to join in this conversation, and also to present this information in a meaningful way. This is old school journalism. What here behind you is a tally sheet. All the political parties do these generally for most of the constituencies, whether it's a local or European or a national election. This one here was done by Fine Gael. It was the Longford-Westmeath by-election where I was based. So actually from early in the day, these counts are very often very surprisingly accurate. It actually had the winner, Gabrielle McFadden, at 26% of the vote. She took the seat. The tallies are very, very accurate. I mean, it's literally counting the votes as they come out. It's very old school, but it is kind of half the crack that comes with covering an election, is all of that. So what we did, we actually posted these online. We got them up very quickly, the first tallies. They didn't tell us anything really beyond to give a flavour of the mood of the nation and how it was looking. So that stuff went up very first thing in the morning. But then the actual counts came. We developed online tools. I'll get to those in just one moment. But this sheet here behind you is essentially how you record the votes. It's very messy. It's just the electorate, the poll, the valid poll. It's the candidates. It's the list of the first preference votes. What we did was that we used this information here, and then we went to one of these three online tools, or these tools here that we have. This was the mobile tool here. So what you did was you tapped into the first one here on the left. You tapped into what election you were covering. Then you went to the candidates. You tapped in the number of votes. Then you sent that information then to independent.ie, where it was used and posted online immediately. So we were generally up there in terms of being the first with the counts from each count centre. So we had a very good understanding of what was happening on the ground. Before a lot of our competitors, both print and broadcast as well, it has to be said, it was all there. What used to happen in the past was that we would ring copy takers, and copy takers were people who would be on the phone and they would take down the results. They would input into the IT system for publication in the paper. I was in Keena, County Longford, covering the by-election. There was no Wi-Fi, there was no internet signal whatsoever. I was the only reporter out in the field who was actually on the phone for the day. Mixed tools, great known as they were, actually were of no use because there was no internet access. Which is interesting because a lot of people got very excited about it, and they had to be asked, well, look, you're writing about this lack of broadband across the country and you're surprised in Keena, County Longford that there is none. Things very quickly get complicated with elections. Again, you're back to your worksheet, and you're back to this again. You've got the first count, you've got transferable votes, you've got candidates being eliminated. What often happens with these counts is that results come in very thick, very fast, often without announcements. So basically somebody stands up and starts reading out the counts. So you have to be on your feet and on your toes the whole time. The customised tool was obviously you then used to throw the information into independent.ie and was thrown up. And then we came up with this. What did we offer our readers? Well, on the homepage, there was the stories of the day as they were breaking. There was the counts, which you can see here on your left-hand side. Every count centre in the country, you could drill into it. You could look at the national summary, see the state of the parties. You could get into the individual candidates. You could get into the total seats by party. We had the stories, we had the tallies, we had the counts. We had discussions in our in-house studio about what was happening. We had political analysis going on in there. And then we had a constant Twitter feed. We had Facebook. We had updates on this all the time. I think the Indo, in fairness, was the only media organisation to carry the results of every single count across the country. It certainly led the way in a new way of doing things and in providing this information to our readers, both in print and online. And it certainly paid dividends because readership increased by about 40%, I think, over the course of the weekend. And even the political parties were using our data to figure out what was going on the ground. Of course, we didn't ignore our print readers. The Herald, the Sunday Independent, the Irish Independent all provided comprehensive coverage across the weekend. and we had a 32-page election supplement on the Monday, which also went very well. And as I said, one of the first examples of reverse publishing, where the online side of the house, I guess, drove a lot of the content that ended up in the print products. The final piece I'm going to talk about is the rent report, which we carried recently. This focused really on one of the most pressing issues facing people today, which is rent. As I said, 1 in 7 rental properties. There is no clear picture out there as to what the average rent is. To date, these averages tend to be gleaned from information from daft.ie and other property websites, which is based on the market, the asking price in the market. We used a different source. We used data on actual rents paid as recorded by the Private Residential Tenancies Board in its National Rent Index. All tenancies by law must be registered with the PRTB. Because it's required doesn't necessarily say that they all are, a lot aren't. However, there is, I think, about 800,000 tenancies or so registered, so it's a robust source of information. The information that's required includes the name and address of the property, the landlord, the tenant details, but crucially also the rent that's paid. So this is real data that we used. And this is all compiled by the Economic and Social Research Institute. It looks at the number of bedrooms, it looks at the type of property, a detached house, an apartment, a bedsit. It looks at the area. There's more than 400 locations that are the information is available, right down to towns like Tullow, right up to cities and suburbs of Dublin. And what this allowed us to do really was to get the most common house types. The ESRI also had data on that. So that was a 3-bed semi-D and a 2-bed apartment. In the cities, we also used a third metric, the most common type of property that was rented. And that basically allowed us to say, here's the average rent across the country, here's what you're paying in your area, here's what the average is. So it allowed people to gauge if they were paying too much or too little. We used this interactive tool here where you could go in and you could actually click down, you could figure out in your town how much the average prices were. That was very useful. It got quite a lot of traffic online. What we found with this was that in large homes in parts of Dublin, the average rent was $2,300 a month, but you could get a similar size property in other counties for $450, so quite a big discrepancy there. It showed the most expensive average rent across the country was nearby here in Grand Canal Square, which was at €1,950 per month. We looked at the sharpest rises, the sharpest falls. We spoke to people hoping to purchase their own homes but couldn't because they couldn't save a deposit because they were paying such high rent. And we also spoke to an accidental landlord who wrote about being caught in negative equity, being unable to sell their property and really being forced to rent. That actually got an awful lot of traffic online with a lot of very nasty views as to why they just couldn't sell it, and they were kind of a rich landlord but obviously they had missed the entire point of what this person was writing about. Audience reaction was very strong, very positive. We did this also with the use of online polls. We asked people things like, how much should you pay in rent? What's a fair rent for this type of property, in this type of location? We got quite a lot of reaction about that. And then we wrote a piece then at the end of it, summarising all of those concerns from people. So there was a lot of reader feedback online and again in our print products. I guess the conclusions, really, I'll come to that. The key to all of this is that in terms of storytelling, using data is nothing new. Things have changed an awful lot. There's much more data out there. It's much more accessible. We can do more with it, particularly online. And there certainly is more collaboration, I think, going on between the traditional old school journalists and the data scientists who are now working with us as well. Some government agencies are better than others at providing this information. Some is very patchy, some are very difficult to get it from. That's something I think government needs to address. I think there's a public consultation on that now at the moment, which is quite useful and welcome. In terms of the practicalities of using this, the skill sets aren't always available. I mean, the extent of my data skills, really rely on Excel spreadsheets. Obviously, Mick and his team would take that to entirely different levels. And that's the kind of stuff I guess we all need to be upskilling ourselves for over the coming years to get better and better at processing this stuff. There is a note of caution with all of this as well. Subsequent to Crime Nation being published, the CSO discovered that there was an error with a lot of the crime data that was out there. The Gardaí weren't recording it correctly, so some offences may have been underreported. That since has changed, and it's now where it should be. But it certainly shows the challenge in this fairly new area, that you're very much reliant on the data that you're getting. Particularly official data really should be better than that, and that's something we just all have to keep an eye on over the coming years. That's me. You're going to hear from Mitchell now, who's going to speak about advertising, and thanks very much for your attention.